IVM.
On November 12, 2019, the Future of Protein Summit was in full swing. Over 400 entrepreneurs, corporate veterans, investors, key policymakers, and diplomats had assembled in New Delhi to talk about the transformation underway in the global food system and how India needs to continue making strides to keep pace with that transformation. As if to underscore the point, on that same day, America's largest dairy producer, Dean Foods, filed for bankruptcy. The storied 94-year-old company had struggled in recent years and blamed those struggles on the accelerated decline in the conventional white milk category. 1%, 2% skim milk, whole milk, it really doesn't matter. Sales for cow's milk have been declining in the US for over 4 straight years. According to the US Department of Agriculture's annual report, nearly 3,000 dairy farms shut shop in 2019.
In stark contrast to this carnage in legacy cow's milk, plant-based milks such as those made from seeds, nuts, and cereals are booming, catering to consumers' newfound preferences for variety and less impact on the planet. Companies like the Swedish oat-based milk producer Oatly have become hugely popular, with consumers lining up at their local cafes to get a taste. At the time of recording, this interest has been sent into hyperdrive, with consumers feverishly stocking up on shelf-stable, plant-based milks during the current COVID-19 crisis and global lockdowns.
Globally, plant-based milk is the most developed of all plant-based foods categories. It was pegged at $17.4 billion in 2018, more than doubling from $6.7 billion 10 years back in 2008. 41% of all US households purchased plant-based milk in 2019, up from 39% in 2018. Over 125 plant-based dairy startups are working on diversified plant-based ingredients like oats, soya, banana, cashews, hemp, and even cauliflower.
Technology think tank RethinkX predicts that this is just the beginning, that Dean Foods and other bankruptcies are the canary in the coal mine. By 2030, they say the US dairy and cattle industry will collapse and a slew of technologies will satisfy consumer demand, effectively rendering the cow obsolete as a food producer. So how do these global trends impact a country like India, where the cow is revered, where dairy products are used not just in the kitchen but in religious rituals? The majority of Indians are practicing Hindus, and products like milk, ghee, and yogurt are often used as offerings in ceremonies. The Indian dairy sector and consumer are unique, and legacy dairy is not just culturally deep-seated, but also a key piece of the country's economic history.
Take the Gujarat Cooperative Milk Marketing Federation Limited's Amul brand of legacy dairy products, for instance. Amul is the world's 13th largest dairy brand and has risen to a rupees 45,000 crore or $6.5 billion turnover, in no small part due to what is called India's White Revolution, the world's biggest dairy development program. In post-independence India, the White Revolution and producers like Amul leveraged the cooperative model and government subsidies to make milk easily accessible to all Indians. They created jobs and income for millions of small farmers.
But the dairy industry in India has been besieged with challenges over the last few years, with the Union Minister for Science and Technology and Health and Family Welfare, Dr. Harshvardhan, saying in 2018 that over 60% of milk in India is adulterated due to malpractices in the supply chain. With the growing global movement away from legacy dairy amid concerns about environmental and health challenges, are all those jobs and incomes at risk? Can new categories like plant-based milks, fermentation, and cell culture create more resilient supply chains and jobs to fill those gaps?
We're joined today by the Good Food Institute India's Science and Technology Specialist, Siddarth Bhide. Siddarth holds a master's degree in food science from Rutgers University, USA, and a bachelor's degree in food technology from Osmania University in Hyderabad. Prior to joining GFI, Siddarth worked as a food scientist at Just in San Francisco, where he was a key contributor to formulating and manufacturing the Just egg made from mung beans. Siddarth has also been a part of multiple research and development and food safety internships with General Mills USA, Rutgers Food Incubation Center, and Nestle in India. Over the last few months, Siddharth has been diving deep into the formulation and applications of new kinds of dairy. I'm Varun Deshpande, Managing Director at the Good Food Institute India.
And I'm Ramya Ramurthy, the Communication Specialist at the Good Food Institute India. And you are listening to Feeding 10 Billion. Welcome to the show, Siddharth.
Thank you, Ramya. Thank you, Varun. Glad to be on the show.
So let's start off with the plant-based dairy in the US. It's considered the harbinger of growth for the alternative protein sector there because it garners 13% of the share of the value of the dairy market in the US. And obviously it's expected to grow further. But largely consumers who buy plant-based dairy in the US now are also people who buy legacy dairy products. So is it fair to now say that this is no longer a niche plant-based trend anymore? And what would you consider the parallels to the Indian market?
Yeah, Ramya. So plant-based dairy has grown significantly in the US over the last few years, and it has captured a good amount of share from legacy dairy products. So it is definitely fair to say that it's not a niche plant-based trend anymore. But in terms of parallels to India, I think India is still at a very nascent stage for plant-based dairy. And if we look at the reasons around it too, right, people are just getting aware of the importance of plant-based meat, egg or dairy products and the kind of impact they can have on sustainability going ahead. So that's one thing in which India is still catching up and learning more. Secondly, is also the general ecosystem for plant-based foods. You know, the availability of functional ingredients or the availability of pilot or manufacturing facilities to make these products is still upcoming in India. Added to that, you know, the bar for a plant-based dairy product in India is so high, right? Because traditional dairy products, you know, they need to survive boiling. You need to be able to make curd from them. You need to be able to add them to like tea and coffee products, you know, make cream, butter and ghee from it. So in the West, where it is primarily used in a cold milk sort of a format, and you use it to, you know, consume your breakfast cereal. In India, the bar is just too high. You need to have a product that is functional for a lot more applications. And there is also a little religious aspect to milk in India. So it's about identifying the right market. So in terms of parallels, India is still at a very nascent stage, but this also means that there is a lot of room for growth in the future.
Yeah, Siddharth, so could you actually speak a little bit further to what you meant when you said the functionality of the ingredients available? So for example, on season 1 of Feeding 10 Billion, we had Mark Khan, the managing partner from leading agri-tech investment firm Omnivore, on the show. And he said that milk is consumed very differently in India. And you also just said the same thing. So you might have to adapt to different ways of using it. You might have to adapt to plant-based milk that can be heated up, used in teas, used in different applications in ways that are not demanded in the West. Could you speak a little bit to the challenges there?
So milk, you know, like just think of a typical like Indian family, right? Like, you know, as soon as the milk comes in, you know, first thing they do is boil the milk. Now, when you boil the milk, you know, proteins typically get denatured by the process of heat. And you need to make sure that the plant-based milk that you have, you know, the proteins in it don't get denatured in such a way such that the proteins start aggregating and sedimenting at the bottom or they start gelling, etc. So that's one of the functionalities that we need to look into. Secondly, when a milk is added to tea or coffee, there is a pH drop. So we need to make sure that, you know, the proteins don't coagulate because of this pH change. And in terms of making other food products in India, like cream or butter or ghee, we need to have the right blend of fats. Like even when you look at milk fat, it's very complex. You know, it is a combination of different solid fats and liquid fats. So we need to figure out which plant fats, you know, can be mixed at what ratios to actually give the feeling of a milk fat. So there are a lot of functionalities that need to be taken into consideration when making a plant-based, you know, a truly functional or a truly bovine milk replicable plant-based dairy product.
Siddharth, you just spoke a bit about the technology that goes into a plant-based dairy product in the Indian context. But compared to other products in our sector, in the alternative protein or smart protein sector, say like the plant-based meat burger, perhaps unfairly plant-based dairy has always been seen as a low-hanging fruit. So could you take us through the process of actually making a plant-based dairy product? What are the specific scientific processes it involves? And how do you maybe counter those people out there who think that this is nothing more than glorified almond water?
So there are different ways of making, you know, plant-based dairy products, and we could start off with a fundamental product of plant-based milk, right? One way of going about it is to take the whole seeds or nuts, mix them with water, and then separate out the insoluble fibrous part, and then mix it with other ingredients like fats and flavors, emulsifiers, etc., to get it close to a legacy milk product. Another way of doing it, which a lot of people do, is instead of using the whole bean or a whole seed, They basically use a combination of water, oil, and proteins to make an emulsion. And then to that, they keep on adding, say, like different types of starches or flavors, etc., to get it close to a plant-based milk product. In terms of people who say it is nothing more than glorified almond water, I would say glorified almond water is plant-based milk 1.0, right? But what we are really aiming for is a plant-based milk 2.0 or 3.0. It is similar to saying that, a black bean burger is your chicken burger, plant-based chicken burger. That's no longer the case, right? Now we are trying to use different technologies like extrusion, shear cell, etc., to get it as close as possible to meat. And that is what is happening even in plant-based dairy. In terms of ease of making plant-based dairy products, I would say the advantage what plant-based dairy products have over plant-based meat is that a lot of infrastructure that is currently used in the traditional dairy industry can still be applied to creating plant-based dairy products because most of the unit operations are still the same. But care still needs to be taken to make sure that cleaning is done properly so that there is no mixing of dairy products with non-dairy products on a manufacturing line. Whereas when it comes to plant-based meat products, a key technology that is used called extrusion is still not very available, both in India and the West in terms of at co-packers. Yeah, so I would say that in terms of just making the products, probably plant-based dairy is easier, manufacturing them, but developing a plant-based dairy product is probably as technical and difficult as a plant-based meat product. And just to highlight this case, if you could tell me one product, be it India or be it in the West, that really gives all the functionality as we were, mentioning earlier, that it can survive boiling, it can survive fermentation, it can, it has the right, combination of fats from which you can make butter, ghee, etc. There are products in the West like, Ripple's, Mylk, etc. But I'm not sure. I would be very surprised rather to, if they really function in making butter, ghee from it too.
Yeah, so I should say I'm one of the people that refers to much of the plant-based milks that have been on the market for a while now as being glorified almond water. And that's really a challenge to entrepreneurs. What I'm saying is, if you're looking to get involved in this sector, you really should do what Siddarth is describing. You should focus on providing consumers and producers with all the functionality of dairy in your plant-based product or your fermentation-based product so that you're actually satisfying the needs of the market as opposed to, mixing up some almonds and water. I mean, that's, I think, a bar we should set for ourselves in plant-based dairy 2.0 or in alternative dairy 2.0.
So I just had a quick follow-up question to that, Siddarth, and maybe Varun can speak to this as well. But, perhaps the advantage that people might perceive in legacy milk is that this one product has such different functionalities. And in plant-based dairy, is that possible that you have one plant-based dairy product that can be applied in so many different ways, or is that still evolving? And currently, is it one product for cheese and one product for milk and one product for curd, which shows that there is still a lot of scope for improvement to create this one hero product that can function in different ways, right?
Yes, Ramya. So I would say now we'll just take examples from companies, right? So we had Abhay Rangan from Good Milk who spoke in one of our GF Ideas India seminars. If you look at his product portfolio, right, he has a product made from cashews and oats, which serves as a replacement for milk. But he has a curd made from peanuts. Similarly, in the West also, we have companies like Kite Hill and Daya, which make yogurts. And I don't remember their basis, but, their products are standalone products as yogurts. Whereas, companies like Ripple, they make just milk products and they don't, usually advise their customers that, okay, you have milk, but you can also make yogurt from it at home. So it is definitely easier to make a product which satisfies one functionality. So be it like just plant-based milk or plant-based yogurt or plant-based butter. So Miyoko's has a lot of like plant-based butters and plant-based cheeses versus trying to make a product which satisfies all the functionalities. That is more technically challenging. And I think the right approach right now would be, for a lot of entrepreneurs and what we have seen in India and in the West to get some products out in the market, just satisfying one functionality or maybe two functionalities at the most, and then eventually build up on the data, build up on the R&D that you are doing to, in the end, eventually create like a product that satisfies all the functionalities.
So Siddarth, in the West, we're seeing a movement away from the more water-intensive crops like almonds, which have been used for plant-based dairy in the past, to crops like oats. Oat-based milk witnessed nearly a 700% growth last year in the US. So what determines the shift in these trends? Is it just taste and functionality, or agricultural value chains benefiting certain crops come in? And how does this translate to localizing the concept of new dairy? Will Indian innovators be able to use indigenous or locally available crops to make similar offerings? And can you speak to what the scientific difficulties are in moving to those new crops?
So I feel it's a combination of a lot of things. So, like the prominence of oats or the reason that oats has come up very significantly when compared to almond is definitely because almond is a much more water intensive crop. But in addition to that, it is also about the functionality, right? That is the key. So oat milk is in general more functional, like more pH resistant than almond milk. At the same time, it has a higher viscosity, because of which, you don't need to add certain gums to the products like as you need to do in almond milk products. So it's cleaner label. It has a better nutritional profile if you compare like a 200 milliliters glass of almond milk versus 200 milliliters glass of oat milk. Oat milk would probably have higher protein content and more vitamins and minerals. So it's a lot of things coming together. And secondly, answering like about India's scope or role in this, India has got a lot of indigenous crops. Like we have our millets, we have pulses, and definitely these could be used to creating plant-based dairy products. But I feel there are certain things that need to happen before they're used in plant-based dairy products. Like we need a lot of food science data, like, are millets, soluble in water, because that's the key, right? You don't really want a plant-based milk with all your protein sedimenting out. So you need data on solubility, you need data on emulsification, you need data on just the nutritional profile, because as we have seen, the nutritional profile of crops or between different varieties of crops can vary so much. And this is one of the projects that we are undertaking at GFI India, especially in sorghum, pearl millet and finger millet, where we are characterizing it from a genomic and food science functionality perspective. And once we have this data ready, then we could probably plug and play in creating products from these indigenous crops.
Yeah, I should say a couple of things. So, I mentioned almond earlier is less sustainable than some of the newer crops that are being used in this sector, like oats. But it's worth mentioning that almond is vastly more sustainable than cows when it comes to making milk, right? So those are things to keep in mind, that we're still moving in the right direction and almond milk is still growing. It's just that oats and these newer agricultural value chains are growing at a very, very rapid pace, which is fascinating because if you look at some of the scientific fundamentals that Siddarth said need to be put in place, that's all really difficult and expensive work to do. So when you have an opportunity to enter a new crop like oats, I think a lot of companies will jump on that. So with Oatly's success in the US, you've seen Chobani, which is quite a celebrated brand now in regular legacy yogurt and Greek yogurt, entering the oat milk and oat yogurt place as well. So that's super fascinating. And I think it bodes well for other companies rushing into these new value chains.
So Siddharth, how would we compare plant-based dairy's environmental footprint to its legacy counterparts? If you look at plant-based meat, for instance, Beyond Meat uses 99% less water, 93% less land, 46% less energy, and emits 90% fewer greenhouse gases than a conventional beef burger with the same taste. Could you speak to the similar benefits of plant-based dairy?
So Ramya, according to a study by the University of Oxford, plant-based milk uses about 76 to 88% less water than conventional legacy milk, uses 94% less land, and emits about 60 to 84% fewer greenhouse gases when compared to legacy milk. So I would say switching to plant-based dairy is definitely contributing to environmental sustainability.
Switching track a little bit, we can't really ignore the cultural importance of dairy in India, right? So it stems from the holy cow, the idea that it's the first food most of us know, and has permeated every aspect of our cuisine in many ways, as well as several religious rituals. So will plant-based dairy have to remove itself from these cultural signifiers? Will it embed itself into them? Or is the point moot because climate change and sustainability will make these products the default choice anyway?
So Varun, I feel that given the size and population of India, I think there is enough market for plant-based dairy, even excluding the religious and cultural aspects. I feel the focus should be on delivering a truly functional, a truly comparable product to legacy milk and tell different stakeholders the pros and cons of each of the options and then leave it up to them to accept it or not.
So Siddharth, in the Indian ecosystem, one company has pioneered plant-based dairy, as you mentioned, Abhay Rangan's Good Milk. And he was on our weekly webinar recently and spoke about having like a supportive plant-based community willing to patiently buy his products, even as he learned through some degree of trial and error what works best for his products, be it milk or curds, whether he should go shelf stable or refrigerated, or which combination masks, off-tones or nut flavors the best. So what are your key takeaways from his story that can be generalized for all entrepreneurs looking to enter the plant-based dairy space?
Abhay's webinar on plant-based dairy was very apt, and there were a lot of learnings to be had from his webinar. Couple of things that I remember is first, Abhay saying that his focus was on delivering a functional product. And again, as I mentioned earlier, he has a product to replace milk, right? So which is made from cashews and oats. And then he has a product made from peanuts to replace curd. So the target here was to, make products with a specific functionality and launch them. rather than waiting for the perfect product, which will satisfy all the functionalities, which would probably take a lot more time. So what Abhay rightly pointed out is, fail fast, fail cheap. Second one was community support and interest. He said that his customers were ready to support him through his trial and error stages. So this should make the entrepreneurs feel more confident, because I feel a lot of times entrepreneurs are scared of failing, but it's okay to fail. You have the entire community to support you, and you are really, in a very nascent ecosystem. There are not a lot of people doing this, and people want more plant-based dairy products to be out there in the market for them to consume. So it's okay to fail, just learn from your mistakes and, don't repeat the mistakes again. And then thirdly, few of the things Abhay mentioned, like developing products in the West is very different from developing products in India. Like, you need to understand your consumers in India. You need to understand what is available in India. Now, you're saying that you need a particular protein isolate that has been used by some company in the West, which is very functional. But then if you use it in India, the price of your milk goes up by 3 times. Then you can't really use it. So understanding the context is very important. Lean R&D, get the products out quickly. I think all of these were good learnings. And someone who wishes to be an entrepreneur in this space and launch products in this space, there's a lot to learn from.
On that note, we'll take a short break. Stay tuned for more on Feeding 10 Billion.
Hey everybody, welcome to another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, as I'm sure you know by now. I would like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money and Intel. They've been extraordinary sponsors and we couldn't appreciate them more. It's been a really, really cool week on the network. We've had Ashwin Sanghi on Cyrus Says. We have Masaba Gupta on Advertising is Dead. You should definitely check out Vivek Lath, who showed up on Storytellers and Story Sellers. A close friend and partner of ours, Karthik Parija, was on the Pragati podcast talking about the future of podcasting, which I think is really, really interesting. And I would like to ask people to check out All Things Policy and what they've been doing. They've been having some really interesting discussions about India's challenging relationship with China as we go forward. And I think that would be a great thing for you guys to check out. So with that, let's get you back to your show.
Welcome back. You're listening to Feeding 10 Billion. Siddharth, when we heard the Good Milk webinar, the heartening thing was that now they're positioned to leverage food technology to create a plethora of products and distribute via retail channels and focus on branding as they move forward. And hearteningly, like plant-based consumers are just 30% of their consumer base, which means that mainstream acceptance is actually growing. So what would you consider are the barriers to growth now?
Just thinking of it from a research and development and manufacturing perspective, certain things, which are part and parcels of a growing ecosystem to really get truly functional products or truly dairy replicating products that, lack of functional ingredients. So be it on the protein side or be it on the fat side. So if Good Milk wants to develop a product through which you can also make butter or cream, then, we need to have the right combination of plant fats that could mimic this. And that could be something that is, lacking in the Indian ecosystem. And then if this is imported from the West, the price of your product could go really high. And even on a manufacturing perspective, I think co-packers and co-manufacturers are still just understanding the entire field of plant-based dairy. And so it takes a lot of education before you can manufacture products with them, or get them to install other equipments like homogenizers or maybe like plant protein extraction facilities, etc., which you can utilize to make your products. So these could be bottlenecks in the short term. But then, this is where GFI comes in, right? Every day we have so many calls with ingredient suppliers asking them to make more functional products. Like, for me, if I want to use a pea protein isolate in my product, I also need supplementary information along with it. Like, what is its emulsification capacity? What is its solubility? And we are asking these people to do all these assays and so that they could, give the right information and a lot more information to the entrepreneurs. We are trying to talk to co-manufacturing facilities, asking them to install these equipment so that, entrepreneurs can actually come in and, just do a pilot run or a manufacturing run of their products. We are talking to university ecosystem wherein, entrepreneurs could go to the labs at universities and, do a lot more trial experiments, use a different sort of analytical equipment available to do an analysis on dairy products and then translate it to plant-based dairy products. So still a few more challenges in the short term, but I feel in the medium term to long term, these barriers would be removed through the work that GFI is doing.
So yeah, Ramya, I think that question is actually excellent because as Abhay says, where real impact is going to come into this ecosystem is in getting people who do not self-identify as vegan or already eating in a vegan way to adopt your product. Really getting people who are thinking about sustainability and who might be called globally, they're called flexitarians, is what's really driving this segment forward. And I mean plant-based foods writ large. So Siddharth, what future projections can we make then about how the plant-based dairy or the dairy landscape will grow in India? And how can people work with GFI India to create those delicious, affordable plant-based dairy products?
So plant-based dairy is still at a very nascent stage in India, and there's definitely going to be a lot more growth in the coming years. And just, through our work with GFI, we talk to so many companies and entrepreneurs who want to get into this space. And, how can people work together in creating these products? I think, there are different pieces of the puzzle, right? If we start right from crop optimization, like, working with agricultural universities to breed or to precision breed crops in such a way that, either they have a better functionality, better nutritional profile, still at the same time giving yields for the farmers so that they keep cropping it. Then working with food science universities to kind of leverage their experience to set up pilot plant facilities where entrepreneurs can come and, test their products, to, ingredient manufacturers, wherein, manufacturing actually happens in India and manufacturing happens of functional products. Like, getting a soy protein isolate is good, but then getting a soy protein isolate, which is a good emulsifier and is soluble, is even better. So, working with them to just kind of figuring out what changes can be made in the process to actually get these functional isolates. To co-manufacturers, as we were discussing earlier, like, just helping them understand the importance of the space so that they have the necessary cleaning protocols in place. They have the necessary equipment to make these products. And we do this on a daily basis at the Good Food Institute. So I would ask all the stakeholders like listening to this podcast to get in touch with us, and we could help you figure out, strategy, and we could work together in creating this ecosystem.
So Siddharth, if I was an entrepreneur, what are the first 3 things that I should be thinking about when I want to launch a brand in this sector? Would it be cost? Would it be functionality? Or taste and nutrition, as we've been saying all along? Because especially in India, if you compare the labels of good milk or legacy milk, how far away are we from price parity?
So Ramya, overarchingly, GFI's theory of change focuses on taste, price, and convenience as key parameters in a product. But if we go more granular, maybe certain aspects become more important depending on the audience you're targeting and their expected use. So say if I'm an entrepreneur catering to a niche audience who are just looking to use the plant-based milk as an add-on to their tea or coffee, then functionality and taste are very important and maybe priced to a certain extent. But then again, the same audience, but who are looking to make plant-based milk a major part of their nutrition, then in addition to functionality and taste, nutrition also becomes very important. Now, if I'm an entrepreneur looking to cater to a majority of population, and as you know, India is an extremely price-sensitive nation, and who are looking to have plant-based milk as an add-on to their daily tea coffees, then functionality, taste for sure, but then price also becomes very important for them. And same thing, majority of the population is your audience who are looking to make plant-based milk a major part of their nutrition. So then all the 4 things, functionality, taste, price, and nutrition. So it really depends. And what happens typically is when a lot of companies launch their products, they launch it at a higher price point if they are smaller entrepreneurs scaling up because of the cost economics, and eventually the price comes down. But given the complexity involved, right, if I'm launching a product as an entrepreneur, sometimes, I have some data about who my audience is or, what is their end use, etc. So it becomes very difficult for me to really pinpoint on what parameters do I need to hit. So it's always better to hit all the parameters of cost, taste, functionality, and nutrition, because your traditional bovine milk, legacy milk hits all these 4 parameters. So if you really want to get plant-based dairy product 2.0, you need to hit all these 4 parameters.
Now, Siddharth, when we're talking about hitting those parameters, there are other dairy alternative products and technologies that might not be plant-based, right? So like there's a company called Perfect Day, which was founded by 2 Indian founders and has raised over $100 million, or Turtle Tree Labs based out of Singapore, that are using different kinds of technology and are making huge strides on that technology. Can you tell us what those technologies are, how close they are to creating Dairy 2.0, and what differentiates them from plant-based?
Yeah, Varun. So the companies, what you mentioned, the technologies, what they use are different from the traditional technologies which are used in making plant-based milk products. For example, Perfect Day, this company uses fermentation as a platform to create actual whey proteins and casein proteins, which can then be mixed with fats from plant sources and other functional ingredients to make final dairy products, which are then a combination of fermentation-based proteins, but also some plant-based fats, etc. And so the proteins, what you get in these products are actual dairy proteins and not proteins from plants. So say something like Ripple, right? This company uses milk, but using pea protein. But in the end, pea protein is still very different from a compositional perspective to whey protein or casein protein. Whereas in a Perfect Day product, the proteins are actually whey and casein. So it's much similar to a traditional legacy milk. And when it comes to the other set of companies like Turtle Tree Labs or BioMilk, and if we take Turtle Tree Labs, for example, these companies are actually culturing mammary cells in vitro, and essentially these cells then convert into mammary glands, and these mammary glands give out actual milk. And that's the technology, and we call it cultivated milk technology. It's a very different technology when compared to fermentation or plant-based. Each again has their own advantages, disadvantages, but all three are working towards the same goal of creating a more sustainable milk.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So Ramya, I mean, we had talked about Turtle Tree Labs and companies like them. It's almost like cultivated meat, where you're growing cells that would be grown inside the body of an animal. You're just farming them outside the body of the animal instead of farming the animal. So what Turtle Tree Labs and another company Siddarth mentioned, BioMilk, out of South Carolina in the US, are doing is they're actually cultivating those mammary cells that would produce milk inside the body of a human or of a cow. And they're getting the milk from that when it's been cultivated outside the body of the living organism, which is really, really interesting. And it has a huge amount of potential. So Siddarth, you and I were discussing this as well, right? A lot of the applications for this might even be in medical grade technology. So when it comes to breast milk, for example, this is a huge nutritional need currently in the world, where a lot of people are eating infant nutrition. Companies are providing things that are made out of plants, but you might have something that's nutritionally superior if it's made this way. And of course, that might be necessary for infant nutrition. But I think what's going to happen overall for the entire spectrum of milk is we'll have a combination of these various technologies. So we might have plant-based milks that use a fermentation-derived ingredient or even an ingredient from a Turtle Tree Labs type platform. And, 10, 20 years from now, we won't look back and say, oh, these are the technologies that were used. It'll be kind of like bread, because bread uses different types of technologies. There's fermentation, there's yeast, there's plant-derived ingredients, there's crops. I think we'll be looking back and seeing this as quite normal 10 to 20 years from now.
Exactly, Varun. And that's what we see even in the plant-based meat space, right? And case in point being the Impossible Burger. It uses soy protein, which is a plant-based protein. It uses extrusion technology, which is primarily used in plant-based protein side. But then it also uses its soy legumoglobin, which is created using fermentation platform.
So guys, it looks like the future of dairy might be a hybrid between the technologies we're discussing today. And obviously they'll have to create their own USP to, beyond just the hitting those markers of taste, price, convenience, as well as nutrition that we discussed earlier, Siddarth. So will that differentiator or the USP for these products actually depend on the technology platforms they choose? For instance, will milk made from animal cells call itself real milk or advertise itself as a no hormones or no antibiotics version of milk? Will they market themselves for the lactose intolerant and so on? Or will they just focus on the taste and nutrition like we've been saying all along in this podcast? And what do you think the market's going to look like in 5 or 10 years from now globally? And where are we when it comes to India? Like, how far are we from that?
So Ramya, I think the answer really depends here, and I think there are a couple of questions in this. So answering your first question on which milk, be it plant-based milk or fermentation or cultivated, will call itself real milk. I think this depends, right? Like, just what is the definition of real milk? If we go by the US FDA definition, I believe it is milk from mammary glands or milk from mammals is how they define it. So if you look at it in that way, so your cultivated milk is essentially produced from mammary glands, but it's just in vitro. So that would be probably closer to real milk. I mean, again, if real milk is still defined that way in the future, when compared to fermentation based, where, we are getting the same whey proteins and casein proteins, but then we are mixing it with, fats from plants and other functional ingredients, which are not present in traditional legacy milk. And then comes plant-based, wherein even the protein source is different. But if we look at, real milk from a functionality perspective, right? The products out there in the market are predominantly plant-based milks. And then, Perfect Day is now coming up with a fermentation-based product, and cultivated meat is yet not commercialized. So I would say plant-based milk is ahead in its race of making the milk product as functional as a real milk product. So from a functionality perspective, again, it really depends on how fermentation and cultivated milk scale up over time. And plant-based has already shown that it is scalable. In terms of benefits of the product, all three could be without hormones and without lactose, plant-based and fermentation-based milks for sure. Cultivated milk, I'm not very sure how they are going to scale up. And I'm very excited to see the next 10 years when they scale up to see what sort of nutritional claims can they have. And again, when we talk about nutrition, like one of the advantages of, say, plant-based technology or fermentation technology is that we could change the nutrition. So as we know, even in the meat industry, meat is high in saturated fat, but the plant-based meats that are being made are low in saturated fat in general. So this is a technology that is available to us. So yeah, so I think the answer really depends. It's a very interesting space, that is going to develop in the next few years.
That is super exciting. And I think one great example of this, Siddharth, is Perfect Day, which launched a limited release of ice cream very recently, where they said, look, we've created this fermentation-based dairy protein, but without the lactose. So they use the dairy protein that they derive from their fermentation platform, and they put it into a plant-based ice cream. And theoretically, at least, when you're getting the dairy protein that's exactly the same as what emerges from a cow, you might have a perfect blend of ingredients when it comes to having a plant-based ice cream in the future. And it would be lactose-free. So I think that there's a lot of really, really great work to come here. And I think it's going to be really great that it's going to make these categories of foods, ice cream, milk, a lot of different things that are prevalent in India, like lassi, etc., available to people who are lactose intolerant as well. So all of that being said, Siddharth, in the year 2050, what kind of beverage will we be drinking, and what will a dairy entrepreneur's day look like, since you've examined this area very closely?
Well, I feel, Varun, as something that you mentioned earlier in this podcast, I think it would be a milk made from a combination of a cultivated platform, fermentation platform, and plant-based platform to really, have all the advantages of these platforms in to make a perfect product. And I would say, product which really satisfies, the criteria of taste, price, and convenience to the traditional animal products which are available in market right now, maybe even superior to that. In terms of what would a day in the life of a dairy entrepreneur look like, I would say the focus would still be on innovation. Maybe there are technologies what we don't know of right now as we are recording this podcast that will also be emerging by that time. And, I don't know what those technologies are, but we can surely say, given the world is progressing, there would be a lot more artificial intelligence, a lot more automation involved in creating these products.
Fantastic. And I think that's all super exciting. And I'm looking forward to the day when these technologies bring great tasting and nutritious foods to market in the dairy space. Thank you so much for being on the show, Siddharth.
Thanks for having me on the show, Ramya and Varun. Glad to do this.
We have a plant-based dairy webinar featuring and authored by Siddharth, as well as our GFI US colleague, Miranda Grizio, which will be launched on our website soon. If you're an entrepreneur or researcher trying to formulate plant-based dairy products, this webinar is for you.
And if you want to start a company in this space or are interested in just learning more about this sector as a researcher or want to collaborate, please do reach out. You can also join our GF Ideas India Smart Protein Innovation community on LinkedIn or follow us on social media. We are Good Food India on Twitter and the Good Food Institute India on Instagram. And we leave all those URLs as well as the LinkedIn URL in our description.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcasts.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I am at VarunD7 on Twitter and at Varun5 on Instagram. You can come ask me why.
And if you want to reach out to me, I'm Cryptic Caprice on Twitter and Dithering Funambulist on Instagram. Please don't ask me why. We look forward to having you with us every week. And of course, if you'd like to be part of accelerating the future of our food system, please just get in touch. You can email us at india@gfi.org.
My name is Varun Deshpande, Managing Director at the Good Food Institute India.
And I'm Ramya Ramurthy, the Communication Specialist at the Good Food Institute India. And you have been a part of Feeding 10 Billion Season 2.
Hi, my name is Anupam Gupta. I'm B50 on Twitter. I am the host of Paisa Vaisa, the show that talks money. On my show, I speak to experts from every field of money and finance, from stock markets, equities, debt funds, credit cards, life insurance, every possible area of money and finance that you can think of. We even did an episode on cryptocurrency. I've got fantastic guests from mutual funds to personal finance experts everywhere. Robo-advisory, startups, just name it, we've got it. At Paisa Vaisa, we help you make smart decisions about money. You work hard for money. Now make your money work hard for you. New episodes out every Monday, and you can listen to my show on the IVM Podcast app or any other podcasting app that you have.
Did I just catch you on your way to work? Or did you end up pulling an all-nighter? Let me guess. You have a packed schedule for the day, the week, and probably the month and the year. That's a lot for your mind to handle, don't you think? This buzzing chaos also brings tons of negative thoughts. Am I right? Try spinning that bottle in a positive direction with me, Chetna, on the Positively Unlimited podcast, every Monday on IBM Podcasts. It's time to change your life one alphabet at a time.